The first thing that broke through the thin apartment wall was not the sound of pain, but the sound of loneliness, raw and unguarded, the kind that only escapes when someone believes the world has finally looked away. It was late afternoon slipping toward evening, sunlight still leaking through the curtains, and I was standing in my small kitchen holding a cup of untouched tea when I realized the crying had been going on longer than comfort allows. It was not loud, not dramatic, just steady and exhausted, like a heart that had been holding itself together all day and finally gave in. In that moment, something inside me shifted, because I knew that pretending not to hear it would be easier, but listening meant my life might never feel the same again. Before the story goes any further, if you believe that kindness still has the power to change lives, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Touch, where second chances are more than just words. My name is Ayaan Faris, and at that point in my life, I was a man quietly surviving rather than truly living. I worked daytime hours as a data analyst in a glass-filled office that looked impressive from the outside but felt hollow within. After a difficult divorce 2 years earlier, I had learned how to keep my world small and controlled. I left for work in the morning, returned before sunset, cooked simple meals, and spent evenings scrolling through memories I pretended not to miss. The apartment complex was calm during the day, mostly elderly residents and remote workers, and the walls were thin enough that you learned each other's routines without ever learning names. The unit next door had been occupied for only 3 weeks, and all I knew was that a woman lived there alone. No music, no guests, no laughter, just silence until that afternoon. As the crying continued, I found myself noticing details I had ignored before, like the way the sound rose and fell with uneven breaths, or how it suddenly stopped and started again, as if she were trying to quiet herself and failing. The clock read 5:17 p.m. Daylight still ruled the hallway outside, and children were playing somewhere downstairs, unaware that pain was unfolding just one wall away. I paced my living room, telling myself it was none of my business, reminding myself how many times I had needed privacy during my own breakdowns. Yet something about the vulnerability in those sobs felt different, heavier, like a final thread unraveling. I imagined someone sitting alone on the floor, surrounded by unopened boxes or unpaid bills, realizing that no one was coming to save them. What I did not know then was that the woman next door was named Samira Kadir, and her story was far heavier than I could have imagined. She had moved into the apartment after fleeing a life that looked stable from the outside but was breaking her apart behind closed doors. A daytime caregiver by profession, she spent her mornings tending to others' needs, listening to their fears, offering comfort she herself had not received in years. The crying I heard was the result of a phone call she had received just hours earlier, informing her that her estranged mother had been hospitalized, and that the family who once pushed her away now needed her again. It was the sound of a woman torn between old wounds and unhealed love. I stood by the door for several minutes, my hand hovering near the handle, my heart arguing with my fear. The hallway was still bright when I finally stepped outside, sunlight reflecting off the cream-colored walls, making the moment feel strangely exposed. I did not knock immediately. I waited, listening again, allowing myself one last chance to turn back. When I raised my hand and knocked, it felt less like an action and more like a surrender. Whatever happened next, I knew I would not be able to pretend my life was untouched. The days that followed were not defined by dramatic gestures, but by small, quiet changes that carried enormous weight. Samira did not become a symbol of tragedy in my mind, nor did I see myself as a hero. Instead, two strangers began orbiting each other's lives through daylight encounters, shared silences, and the unspoken understanding that pain does not need an audience to be real. I noticed how she left early each morning, shoulders squared as if preparing for battle, and returned before sunset, eyes tired but determined. She noticed how I always watered the dying plant outside our doors, how I worked from home on certain afternoons, how I avoided eye contact yet never walked away when she needed a moment of stillness. As weeks passed, something softened between us, something that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognition. I began to understand that the crying I heard that day was not weakness, but release. Samira's struggle mirrored my own in unexpected ways. We were both rebuilding from lives that had taken more than they gave, both learning how to trust the daylight again after emotional darkness. The apartment complex felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a shared checkpoint in two separate journeys toward healing. One afternoon, sunlight pouring through the hallway windows, I watched Samira pause at her door, hands trembling slightly as she read a message on her phone. The expression on her face carried the same weight I had heard in her crying weeks earlier. That was the moment I realized how easy it is to overlook the battles people fight quietly during the day, when the world expects strength and productivity. It reminded me of my own afternoons at the office, staring at spreadsheets while grief sat heavy in my chest, unseen and unacknowledged. The true change did not arrive in a single moment, but in a gradual awakening. I began volunteering on my lunch breaks, offering my skills to non-profits that needed data help. Samira found the courage to visit her mother, not to reopen old wounds, but to close them properly. The crying stopped, replaced not by happiness, but by steadiness, a kind of emotional balance that comes from knowing you are no longer alone, even if the road ahead is uncertain. The wall that once carried sorrowful sounds now felt like a shared boundary of growth rather than separation. Daytime became symbolic for both of us. Mornings meant new chances, afternoons meant endurance, evenings meant reflection without fear. The memory of that first cry never faded, but it transformed from a moment of helplessness into a reminder of what happens when someone chooses to care. I learned that kindness does not always require words, explanations, or solutions. Sometimes it only requires presence and the courage to listen. If this story has begun to stir something inside you, if it reminds you of a moment when someone's pain reached you unexpectedly, please take a moment near the end of this video to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Touch, because stories like this live on through your support and belief. Just before the ending, we have a special request for you. Please comment what kindness means to you, or share a moment when a small act changed your life, because your words might be the light someone else needs today. Looking back now, I realize that hearing Samira cry next door was not an interruption to my routine, but an invitation to step back into humanity. That daytime afternoon taught me that lives do not change only through grand decisions or dramatic rescues, but through ordinary moments where compassion quietly wins over fear. The wall between us never truly disappeared, but it stopped being a barrier. It became a reminder that even in separate spaces, hearts can reach each other. And in answering a cry I could have ignored, I found a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever.